and then we will get started. We're really excited to have Opheli Garcia Lawler this evening for our webinar. If you are online, if you could just share the link out so that we can get everyone to join in and we can get started right away. Happy June.
Hello, everyone. All right, let me make sure that I can watch your chat. Let's see if I can find the chat here. All right, it looks like people are on.
Good. You think we're ready?
We can give them a few. I think we can start with the intro for now, and
Okay.
as people come on, they'll hear the important stuff, and it'll be pre-recorded so they can go back and watch it.
Excellent. So, again, welcome everybody tonight. Thank you so much for joining us this Thursday evening. Tonight, we're joined by an incredible journalist, Opheli Garcia Lawler, for a webinar diving into Media 101, how to connect with the media, what to expect during interviews, how to follow up after an article is released, and how to create a media strategy that supports your advocacy goals for your family. Excuse me. We just want to go over a couple housekeeping things. First of all, we have Raul, our incredible data specialist, in the chat. Raul will be answering questions, pinning some questions and for the end, which we will take questions and answers. So get them in there, and Raul will watch those. Opheli has offered to answer as many as she can. We will have some handouts, and we will share those. And the recording, as always, will be available later on the Gabby Petito Foundation YouTube channel, and we'll also share those out on our socials. So we want to start with introductions. I'm Shayna. I'm the founder of Light the Way Missing Persons Advocacy Project. I'm so thrilled for you all to be here tonight. This has been such an incredible effort on our end to be able to have these incredible guests working with us since we started these webinars in February, and I'm so thrilled to be able to have Opheli with us tonight, educating families on how to work with the media. As many of you know, we started a partnership with the Gabby Petito Foundation this year, where we are working together on some big goals to educate the public and families of the missing and murdered. And we're creating search teams to help throughout the country, so that when families are in need of doing searches, that they'll have some resources available. And we're going to be working on creating some support groups. So that's kind of what we're working on in our first year of our partnership. And I feel really lucky to have Nicole and Haley and Raul and Jim working with us to obtain these goals. Next, I want to introduce Nicole, who is the incredible president of the Gabby Petito Foundation.
Hey everyone, it's good to see you again. I'm gonna talk loud. I hope I'm loud enough, but Raul says we're a little low, so we'll just have to this is a new platform, so apologies. We will talk as loud as we can, and if you can't hear us, just let us know in the chat. So I am Gabby Petito's mom, of course, president of Gabby Petito Foundation, proud to be partnered with Light the Way. I met Shayna a while back, and we just hit it off and became very good friends. And Haley, absolutely adore Haley. She's an amazing person. I'm just really happy to be working with these awesome people. And it's so nice to meet you, Opheli. I'm looking forward to hearing from you tonight. And I hope everybody else is as well. So I'm excited.
I'm so excited too. Thank you for being here, Opheli. We just really appreciate your guidance. And I know Shayna and Nicole and I have been talking like we're going to learn stuff from this. Like we're excited too. So I'm Haley Gray. I am the media specialist for Light the Way. I am also a researcher and writer for multiple podcasts.
Hi, I'm Opheli. I am originally from Florida, but now I live in the Northeast. I have been a journalist now for 10 years. I started doing journalism when I was still in college. And even before that, honestly, I was writing a lot of letters to my local papers in high school. But I went to NYU and received my bachelor's and master's degrees there for journalism. And I've also worked at publications such as The Cut, which is part of New York Magazine, The Fader, Vice, Thrillist, and even a children's publication for a little while. I've also written for Travel and Leisure, Refinery 29, Eater, Vulture, and like an endless number of other publications. And I've also worked on a podcast called Ice Cold Case. So I've gotten a kind of a wide variety of media experience. And I'm really, really passionate about people understanding how journalists engage with them. I'm a really big believer in informed consent interviews, which is when a journalist makes sure you understand why you're being interviewed and what you're being interviewed for, and that you agree to the risks and benefits and all other consequences of having your name and information and opinions or experiences shared to a broader audience. So that's kind of where my whole media theory comes and moves through, is that I think people should be able to trust the media, and the media should be able to provide a service to the public. And anything that's not doing that isn't of value. So that's where I'll be speaking from tonight as my perspective, and I'm really excited to answer any and all questions that you have that maybe my experience can, help illuminate. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your introductions. Let's just jump into everything media. And so, our first question, Opheli, is can you give us a quick overview of the types of media that families might engage with?
Oh, you're muted, Opheli. That's okay. I do that every single.
I was like getting going.
I was trying to tell you were muted while I was muted.
So,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Um, I wish they could make it like a little bit smarter so we didn't have to think about it. So there are a lot of different types of media, but depending on when you grew up, you're probably familiar more with like a certain form. So I'm more familiar with traditional media. So when I think of the media and the news, I think of like newspapers and magazines and the radio and television news. However, we live in a time where those are not the only types of news anymore. And in fact, most people probably aren't getting that their news from those types of platforms, even if they grew up with them. So there are four. I broke down the main types of traditional media into four buckets. There's newspapers, there's television news, there's the radio, and there's magazines. So when you think of newspapers, you have your big national newspapers like the New York Times and the Washington Post, but also you have more regional or city publications that are focusing on more on a specific area: Chicago Tribune, Orlando Sentinel, Indy Star, and even smaller ones from there. I'm sure if you live in a smaller town, you might know or recognize a hyper local newspaper. And then on television, you have also your national and regional, so CNN and Newsmax, or it's on a more local station like Spectrum News One or KTLA. And then on radio, you have like like I call it Y, like the Philly radio station here. But you turn on the radio and you can hear news, you can hear music, blah blah blah. And then you have magazines, which are becoming extinct, unfortunately. So those are your traditional buckets of media, and then you have your new media, podcasts. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with those. Podcasts are one of the fastest growing markets and way to reach an audience in the U.S. and globally. Social media, you have everything from Instagram and X/Twitter and Facebook to kind of other kind of more, well, Reddit might not be new to you, but Reddit is very quickly growing. And then newer platforms like Blue Sky. You have YouTube, which some people might consider a social platform, but has honestly gone into its own media distribution network in its own way. And then you have online publications. So those are things that have never existed in print or any physical format, like, well, Vice used to have a magazine, but like things like Vice or The Cut, things that don't have a physical presence but are a digital publication. BuzzFeed is a great example. And then you have newsletters. I think this is like everyone in the media world is very excited about newsletters right now. They're a very powerful tool to speak directly to an audience. They're growing, and so that you can think of newsletter platforms like Substack are growing their own entire media operations independent of a publication backing. Like, so the New York Times has a newsletter, but also other people who used to work at the New York Times now have their own Substack and don't work for the New York Times anymore. And it's really important to understand all of these things, and not, if you're just like a media news nerd like I am, it's really important to understand it because you have to understand all of the different pathways that you can take to reaching the public. It doesn't have to be just through one of these things, it can be through many of them, or all of them, or only a few of them, depending on your comfort and your needs. And it can also change over time. Like, you can start on social media and then build up to maybe an online publication and then to a newspaper. So it really depends on what you need out of your media coverage, and then you can it's part of your, it can help you build your media strategy by knowing and understanding what's available to you. So that's like a very quick pop. It's the first class of journalism.
Thanks, Opheli. So how do those first connections between families and media typically happen?
So there's two paths, right? The first path is the media will reach out to you, and in that event there's something likely that is very headline grabbing is happening in your life, and in this instance it's going to be horrible, or you're trying to reach out to the media to get attention about this thing, and you have to get the media to care. So I'm going to go through one of those. I'm going to go for the first one of those, and then I'm going to go through the second one. So the first one, the media is reaching out to you. That means that they have found your information somewhere, and you might not even be aware that you have shared how to contact you on the internet, but for nearly everyone on earth, it's there. So for, if I'm trying to find someone and reach out to them and request comment, there's a lot of ways I can do about. One of the tools I use most often actually is LinkedIn. Most people in the world who I'm trying to contact for my stories are on LinkedIn. But then I also use social media. There's Twitter, there's Instagram. You may have shared your email in a post about something entirely irrelevant to anything that's going on right now. Facebook Messenger is a very popular one. So you might get, and then some people pay for services like white pages, which provide most people's listed phone numbers. So if you have your phone number in any database, they can access you that way as well. So depending on the reporter and where they're coming from and how much resources they're working with, they might contact you via social media or phone number. And then if it's a story that's going to have local coverage, or it's already garnered international or national coverage, you might have people showing up at your house. And again, they're finding that information through those same methods. They're going to use the white pages. They're going to use voter registration information, which is public. There's a lot of different ways people can reach you. When that happens, that means that there's already been a boundary that we've kind of violated. Like, anytime you contact someone, you're kind of like pushing a little bit of a boundary. So, and a good reporter is going to be cognizant of that, but we're going to go into what happens when they're not in a little while. So that's the first way, and that's the way people find you. The way people find you is, there's a lot of little breadcrumbs on the internet, as we know. It's like the first thing they teach you in 5th grade is like the internet's forever. It's not forever, but it is very vast. And then the second way is that they are using services specifically that will allow them access to this information. It's also the same way you receive like robocalls and campaign fundraising phone calls and emails. Like, you probably at some point signed up for something that put your name on a list that is like purchasable information. And that's everyone. I can't tell you how many times I've been called, but I'm like, how did you get my phone number? And I know how people get my phone number, and it still is confounding to me. So that's the first way. The second way is if you are reaching out to media yourself. And when that happens, it's going to take a little bit more work. You kind of do the same thing in reverse. So you don't need to buy white pages, and I actually would not recommend cold calling a reporter, because as much as you don't like to be cold called, neither do reporters. So it's never a good way to start out, is something I believe. So you can do the same thing. You can find somebody on social media. You can go to a publication's masthead if you know that you want to reach a local audience, or you're like, oh, I know this story would do really, really well in Elle magazine because they have a great history of covering stories about domestic violence, and so I want to have my story featured because I really trust this reporter. You can go and find Elle masthead. Sometimes they'll list it on their on the website's page, like, here's how you can contact this reporter. But then if they don't do that, you can always find emails or contact people via Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. I've had a lot of great luck that way as well, just reaching out to other reporters whose work I admire, is like cold DMing them on Twitter and being like, hey, I'd love to talk more. What's your email address? And also, sneaky tip is, if you search that person's tweet and like you search their handle and the word email in Twitter, you will probably find that they've tweeted out their email in a request for stories before. And I'll write all of this down in like a more referenceable document. But there's a lot of ways. As crafty as reporters are for contacting you, you can be as crafty for contacting them. It's a two-way street, and I believe it should be a two-way street, because I do believe reporters should constantly be getting a taste of their own medicine. It keeps us honest. And so yeah, that is how, those are the two ways it will go when you're contacting the media, or the media is contacting you.
Great. And so when a family does finally make a connection with a journalist, they feel kind of comfortable with this person, then what's the next step they should take?
Okay, so if you've met someone and you feel really comfortable with them, that's, first of all, that's already great, because sometimes it can be really uncomfortable to establish that first communication, especially when you're from a journalist perspective. It's always kind of really not great when you have to ask somebody for something. Like, the entire industry of journalism relies on people talking to us for free. So that's always a little stressful from this end. But then you need to, once you have established communication, and I would say this first part is even helpful, like part of your establishing communication, you should be also doing this, or doing this even first, which is to come up with a plan. You need to be strategic about what you're saying to the media all the time, not just during the interview, but how you contact them. It's a really smart and really important idea to know what your story is. Did I skip a question? No. Okay. To know what your story is, and to really create a compelling narrative that you want to be told, because the media is going to craft an angle and craft a story, and when you don't have your own narrative to push, you will be left out of that process. So you need to be able to, even if it's sitting down with a piece of paper and taking 5 minutes, you need to decide what your story is. And that needs to be like, if you got to pick what the headline said, what would it say? If you got to pick what the first 3 lines of the story said, what would they say? And that is where you're going to move through everything else through this process. You can alter that and edit that, but that piece of information is going to be what guides you. I think of it as like as a thesis statement. Basically, you need to have everything that you want to say filtered through that lens, because otherwise everything you say is going to be pulled out of context, with or without you doing this. But if you do this, it's going to reduce that and really allow you to feel empowered in how you're speaking about things. Like when I'm reaching out to someone, I've kind of already in my head like established like what kind of story I'm looking to tell. Like I might have already pitched my editor a headline or a story angle that I'm thinking of. But I'm obviously going to be like able to change that if I have information that contradicts that. And if I'm interviewing someone and I'm like, oh, I came in with this perception, but the perception they're telling me is an entirely different one, or the information they're giving me is so compelling that I'm going to reframe, then that's really powerful for you. And it also will advance your mission and help a little bit more keep things focused on what you want to keep them focused on. So if you want a specific objective, like you want a case to be reopened, or a search to be conducted, or a piece of legislation to be considered, you need to make sure that as part of your narrative that you're going to be working through all the time. So the first step is mighty but very important, is come up with that strategy, and consult as many people as will let you consult with them, your family, your friends, if you know lawyers, if you're working with anybody in law enforcement who is willing to like be objective about what's going on. And if you know anybody who's just got a lot of opinions in your life, like that, run it by those people to get their feedback. It's very helpful. But also don't know what you want to say, and like it sounds cheesy, but like it can be a bit from the heart. Like, be strategic but be sincere, because that's what's going to be, the sincerity is what's going to resonate with people, and you can feel it when, I'm sure you've been moved by a story, and when you're moved by a story, it's because of the sincerity of that story. um, and then you also need to be able to set your own boundaries. So when you're reaching out to a reporter, or a reporter has reached out to you, and you are faced with the reality that you're going to be engaging with the media, before you do that, sit down and think about what you're comfortable with. And obviously this is measured against like what need you have, so it's like comfort versus necessity is the real conversation. So if you think you're going to need to do XYZ in order to advance your cause, then you say, okay, these are what I have to do, and now within that, what can I bear to do? So I always think that it's a really good idea to never let a journalist's sense of urgency be your sense of urgency, because journalists are going to be reaching out to you on really tight deadlines. They're going to be getting pressure from their editors. They're going to be getting pressure from all these external sources to get the story. Um, and that's not your problem. It's not. It will never be your problem. And so if they're saying, I need to get on the phone right now, or I need to come do a live interview right now, or I need you to email me back by this afternoon, and that doesn't work for you, you can say no. you know and again, if this is something where it's like it's necessity versus comfort, if it's something where it's like you need it so bad, then you're going to just do it. Okay, like you've established that boundary. But if you're like, no, I have to work today, that's unreasonable, I'm not going to be able to just leave my shift so I can go get on the phone or like show up for a live shot for them to do their job. You can establish those boundaries early on. Another thing is having, and this one's really really important, and I want to pass out little flashcards to everyone, is knowing the very basics of journalist vocabulary and utilizing that to your benefit. So at the beginning of any conversation you ever have with any journalist ever, whether it's on camera, or I mean on camera, you hopefully would have said this before you got on the front of the camera, but on camera, via email, over text, over phone call, every time clarify whether the conversation is on the record, off the record, or on background. Or yeah, those are the three main ones. On the record means you agree to what you're saying to be quoted to your name. So if I say I like eggs in the newspaper, it will say Opheli likes eggs. Off the record, I say I like eggs, it's not in the newspaper. The reporter can go report out that I like eggs. Opheli was seen at the local diner eating 6 eggs. They could say that, but they can't say that I said that I like them. On background, sources say Opheli likes eggs. You know? So you need to know when you're speaking how it's going to be attributed to you. Off the record basically totally means anything you say they can't use in any capacity. It is information that they can find and confirm other ways, so it never gets traced back to you, but they can't ever use what you say. So those 3 things are very important. And again, at the beginning of the conversation, if you have a conversation with someone and halfway through you realize, oh, I said too much, I want to be off the record. Nothing you say before off the record is going to be off the record. It's only what you say after what's off the record. That is like not a legal rule, but it is an ethical rule, and most journalists use those. The few rules that journalists have, they use them to their benefit at every opportunity. So remember those words. And then
real quick, I want to just say that happened to me a few times, but I learned that the really good ones will be like, it's okay if you don't want to say that, we'll take it out. Like, just let us know what you don't want to say. Even if I already said it, I'm like, crap, can you take that out? There's nice people out there that will do that, but you got to be careful. Yeah.
Yeah, there's people interviewing from my personal ethos. If Opheli ran journalism, no one would be interviewing victims' families looking for the gotcha. So in those situations, yes, you can grant grace. You can say, okay, hey, I totally understand. Let me re-ask the question and let me give you another opportunity to answer it. However, that is not how a lot of journalists operate. So it's just better to be cautious. Even if you know a journalist super well, if you're talking about something that could potentially be for publication, it's always okay to be like, hey, just like off the record. Like my friends joke to me sometimes and they'll tell me gossip, but before they say it, they'll say this is off the record. So like it's never just get in the habit of establishing that boundary as soon as you get step started. And then
Can I jump in real quick?
yeah.
So that goes for podcasting too. I know we've done trainings in the past on podcasts, but one thing that we like families to remember is that when you're working with a podcast, you're providing them with content and you have the right to ask them to review what you said that they're going to put in their podcast. So don't be afraid to say that and say, I'd like to review everything that I said, make sure that I didn't get anything incorrect, things like that. So don't be afraid. When you're working with journalists, I'm sure Opheli can talk a little bit more about that. You're not going to have as much leeway, I think, but with podcasts, if you set that boundary up from the start, they should let you see what they're going to include, especially if they're going to include your audio and things like that. Like you have rights, absolutely bring up those boundaries.
Yeah. And journalists oftentimes will not let you see the final product. In fact, I would say almost all journalists will not let you see the final product before it's published. That's just a hard and fast rule for our industry. Um, and then the other boundary I wanted to talk about is you can determine how, when, and the duration of how you speak to a journalist. So if a journalist, again, we already talked about the time thing, where that's their sense of urgency. It's not your responsibility to accommodate that. The other time thing is that if you think you're only going to be able to stomach talking to the media for 10 minutes you can say that. If you think you're not going to be able to handle a phone call and you prefer to talk over email or text, you can say that. If you think that you're going to not be able to handle a live interview, but you think if you did something pre-recorded where you can take those breaks and pauses between questions, you can say that. Um, and oh, yes. So, yes, anything you write on the internet is public knowledge and it can be put in publication. In fact, most journalists day to day, no matter what they're doing, for an example, today I was working on a story about the Fulbright scholars taking, like, they all resigned at once, and one of the members wrote a very public LinkedIn statement. Any tiny piece of that statement could be used and cut from that whole story and be used as a quote. So once you enter the public sphere of the media, you enter being a public figure, whether you like it or not. And that means anything you say on the internet can be quoted. And it might be quoted without the full context that you gave it when you were writing it. So it's very uncomfortable, but it is a reality. And I mean, also, how many times has a family member taken something you said and taken it out of context? It is a very similar process, but it's just blasted out to however large the audience is of that publication. Um, but yeah, back to setting this boundary, like ahead of the interview, you can determine the method of how you conduct it. A lot of reporters really prefer to do phone call interviews just because, and if you're talking to a podcast or something, they're going to want to have like an audio or video recording as well. But you can, if it's the first interview, like a screener interview, you can ask for it to be over text or over phone call, or if you really want to see the person so you can feel like you're connecting with them, you can be like, I want to do a Zoom call or I want to do a Google Meet. You can set those expectations and boundaries as you go. And then the other thing is, again, we talked about knowing what you want to say, talking about us having your story down, your thesis statement of what you want to do. But I'm going to give you an example of how to, like, knowing what you want to say and then being confronted maybe with questions that you aren't wanting to answer. So I call this example eggs on a sunny day. So you only want to talk about the weather, right? You don't want to talk about eggs or anything else. You don't want to talk about anything about the weather for this interview because you're like a weather guy. And you get a question, how do you like your eggs, right? You can respond to a question like that, how do you like your eggs, by saying, I love to eat eggs on a sunny day. I'm not such a fan of rainy days, and then start talking about the weather. It's a pivot move. Any question you get asked, you can turn into the answer you want. That's like most classic media training is like, I acknowledge what you asked me, and then here's what I'm gonna say. It's a graceful little turn to what you want to say. And so knowing that before you do the interview, though, knowing how to do that, practicing that a little bit is very helpful for you to build confidence. So then you're not like, well, no, but also, do you want to hear about my favorite clouds? Like, that's not smooth. You have to say, I'm a big fan of eggs, and I don't like to eat eggs when it rains, because when it rains, my least favorite cloud, the nimbus comes out. Sorry, I'm not a science person. Um, and then the final thing is, you can ask for questions or topics in advance. Big disclaimer on this, though, is that a lot of reporters will not give you the exact questions you will have. They will give you topics. So they'll say, we're going to discuss, I'm going to stick with the weather thing. We're going to discuss lightning, tornadoes, and clouds. Okay, that's the thing to discuss. So then you know you're going to talk about those two things. I think you should always ask, because there's some reporters who might be like, I want this person to be very well prepared for my live on camera interview, and I want to know what they're going to be able to, like, I want them to feel prepared. But most interviews will say no to the questions, but will say that we'll agree to talk to you about the topics, or if it's for a live on camera, you can even ask to do like a run through and have a phone call beforehand, so you can get out the kinks. You can, have just you, as before you talk to the reporter formally, you can ask to talk to them off the record informally, and that can go through email, that can go through text, that can go through the phone, Zoom chat. Again, you can always set up those expectations and needs for your thing, so you feel better prepared for the formal interview. And then I said it was the last one, but I lied. Another really important thing before you sit down for the interview is to know how much time you're going to have for it. So if you're preparing for a 15 minutes interview, that's way different than preparing for like an hour-long interview, or an interview that has no time, because you probably can say everything you need to say. If you have like 2 pages of notes, you can probably say that in 15 minutes. But if you're speaking for an hour, you're going to go off the notes. You're going to go into your maybe more emotional topics. You're going to have to think and be present and be an active listener and be an active speaker for much longer. It can be a bit more difficult. Alternatively, if you only get 15 minutes and the thing you're talking about is complicated, and you feel like you need more time to give space to what you're saying, or you want the full time to give the reporter as much context as humanly possible, you've got pages and pages and pages of researches and notes and material for them that you need them to understand. And then when you're setting up the interview, ask for that. You say like, oh, I only want to do 15 minutes, or like, I only have 20 minutes for you. Or you can say like, I would love to be able to speak longer. Like, can we please set aside an hour? You make sure anything that you think of that you think you'll need or want for an interview. The big lesson here is to ask for it ahead of time. Most journalists will accommodate you or give you a path to making you feel more comfortable, even if they can't directly accommodate what you need. And it never hurts to ask. That's just a good life lesson. It's never hurts to ask. So, yes, I know that was a little bit of a long-winded one, but it's really important to become prepared before you do the interview, because the prep will make the whole process an entirely different experience if you have the opportunity to do it. And if you're not given the time, I would recommend trying to force the time. Even if you can only argue for like an extra, or like advocate for an extra hour, I would advocate for an extra hour to give you a little bit of time to like center, find your thesis statement, and set your boundaries, even if those boundaries are just with yourself.
Yeah, I think all of that's incredible. And I'd love to talk about what to expect during the interview itself. What are your go-to tips?
Yes. So come prepared. The journalist will hopefully be prepared as well, and we'll have a lot of the basic facts of the situation. But I can speak from a decade of experience that sometimes they will not. They will not come to that interview prepared. They should, but they will not. And so you need to be prepared to, with your facts, like as if you can create like a single page fact sheet, or like Haley makes these incredible research documents, something really referenceable that's shareable as well. That's amazing. Come prepared with context. A good journalist will always ask you, is there anyone else that I should speak to? It really is to your benefit if you can direct them to more people. That might be a detective, it might be someone who, like from Light the Way or the Gabby Petito Foundation, who is like an advocate, someone who's an expert that you've encountered, a volunteer, anybody, because journalists are always looking to flesh out their stories with more information, more quotes, more context. So if you have those contexts prepared, one, the journalists will probably like you a little more because it makes their job a little easier. But two, it further helps you control your own narrative because you're directing people for them to speak to that can not only confirm what you're saying, but who hopefully, if you're sharing their contact information, will be in some way able to advocate for what you need from this media coverage. So that's first thing, is come prepared. The other thing you should come with is photos. I think that those are sometimes you'll see media stories and it's clear like they were pulled directly from social media with no input from anybody involved, and that can be, I think, really dehumanizing and an act of invasion also. And it will happen. Like social media, again, is a public domain in most cases, and they will not ask for permission oftentimes. It really depends on what kind of station, what kind of publication you're working with. Like the Daily Mail is very liable to like just take something you put on the internet and put it right in their story, no questions asked. So if you have all of that when you're doing the interview, it really gives you better leverage. And I can see Nicole nodding her head, and like I know that's probably something that maybe if you want to, you don't have to, but if you want to speak to like how that.
Well, I you just said Daily Mail, so I just, I had some experiences, so just be careful who you're working with. I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
have boundaries, like you said before. Just set your boundaries. Be careful. Yeah.
yeah. Understanding like tabloids are gonna have a lot of reach, but tabloids are tabloids. The all of the ethics I'm speaking about, they might not adhere to at all, or only a little bit. And that is the nature of tabloids. Like that, I could go through an entirely history lesson on the creation and invention and proliferation of tabloids. Like that is what they've always done, and they are not going to do anything different for you. Even if you're working with someone who individually works there who might be nice, their editors and the entire publication structure and business model is not built off of a super ethical, super nice way of distributing information. So come prepared with all of that information and be ready to share it with the journalist at the end of the interview, because again, makes their job a little easier. That might help you in the long run, but also it's another tool for you to have control over your narrative. If you're giving them the photos, if you're giving them the information, if you're giving them the people to contact, that's more people kind of speaking from like your side of the whole situation. Even if there's no sides, even if it's just one, you just want the push behind you to be as strong as possible. um and um at the start of the interview, you should ask for a quick summary of what the story is about and what the interview will cover. So they might have not sent you a topic ahead of time, they might not send you questions ahead of time, but at the beginning of an interview, goes back to what I said at the very beginning. I believed in informed consent. I'm never going to interview someone who is speaking to me from a vulnerable situation, which is like most people, and try to like trick them in the interview. So at the beginning of the interview, I say, "Hi, my name's Opheli. My story today is going to be about sorry for eggs and weather. You're gonna they're just nice. It was sunny today and I had an egg. But today my story is going to be about like the 6 different types of eggs, and I'm going to be interviewing you about your expertise cooking them in this one specific way. So today we're going to talk all about hard-boiled eggs, how long we should boil them, if there's a time when they get too boiled, and what's the best way to crack them. So I plan on publishing it on next week, and I'll send you the link when it's live. So let's get into the first question. That's like what I always try to practice, is like I'm giving you the lay of the land. I'm going to let you know what we're going to talk about, and I'm going to tell you when you can see the results of your conversation with me if I know that information. Not every journalist will do that. So you can ask for it. You can say, "Hi, like I'm really excited to speak today. I was just wondering like When do you plan on this being published? Where is it going to be? Do you guys already have like a set angle in mind? And do you have like a scope of what we're going to be speaking about today? And you can ask for those things. You can ask for all of that if you don't really care about when it's going to be published, or if you don't really care what the headline is going to be, which I think most people will. You don't have to ask those things, but you can ask those things at the beginning of the interview. It also signals to the interview that you kind of know your stuff. You know, you're more aware of the situation than I speak to a lot of people who they've never spoken to a journalist before. They've never thought about interacting with the media before. This is their first time doing any of it. So if you show that you know all of those things, one, they should give you that information, but two, it puts you more on a level playing field and equals the power balance between journalist and subject, which I think the journalist has a responsibility for, but again, it's not Opheli's journalism world. Um, Again, and if I was interviewing like the police or politicians or business owners, these rules all go out the window, by the way. This is for when you're interviewing people who you're not trying to like get them to like admit to something or be accountable for something. You're just trying to tell their story. It's very different. So that's important. That's an important note. And then you might get a question you don't want to answer, and this is what I talked about earlier. If you get a question about eggs when you want to talk about the weather, you say, oh yeah, I love to eat eggs during a sunny day, but I really prefer windy days or something like that. You can say something more like you have to be comfortable with redirection. So say something like, I can't speak to that, but I can say more on blank. So if you get a question asking about a really specific detail on something that the police did or something that some part of legislation that you're not familiar with, or some decision or something happening that concerns your case but doesn't concern what you want to say, you can always say like, that's not really what I want to speak about today, but, and then you pivot to what you do want to say. And it can be really simple. I cannot speak to that. However, I can say more on blank. And you can do that for if they ask you 10 questions you don't want to answer, you can do that 10 times. Like, I don't know if the journalist is going to get through all 10 times, but you can say, I'm not really interested in speaking about that. However, and just over and over again, you can keep it really simple. You don't have to create like an elaborate path. You don't have to like weave it into another thing. Like, you're not expected to be like a secretary of state or something where those people are literally trained on how to do redirect artfully. You just need to say, I can't speak on that, but, because even if they put that in the quote, even if that's what they publish, all you said was, I can't speak on that, or I'm not going to talk about that. Yeah. That might not make you seem like the cheeriest person in the world, but it's better than you spending 5 minutes trying to talk your way out of a question you didn't want to answer, and having that published.
Redirection is so important. I became like an expert at it. We all did, all the 4 parents. But there are some journalists, I'll tell you, they're really good at asking the question in so many different ways. You almost end up answering the question anyway at some point. So just be really mindful of the questions that they're asking and how they're just changing them up and trying to get you to say something, and keep redirecting. And then at some point, just say, I'm not going to answer that. Yeah. And, I was lucky to have a PR person with me one time that said, that's enough. She's not answering the question. So, yeah.
And journalists are trained. Again, like, that's something we learn in journalism school. Like, if you're trying to get, like, sometimes you go into reporting a story and you need someone to get to say one specific thing. Like, if it's a story that's been very sensationalized and that there's like public curiosity about a very specific facet of a story, your editor is going to be like, you do not leave that interview until you get me for them to say. So that's where the journalist might be coming from, that perspective, where they're like, I need this. Like, I've been told I have to get this. You can just say, if they keep saying it over and over again, if they're asking you like in 3 different ways, like, and it's especially if it's something that it's like you answering it is going to compromise on those boundaries you set before for yourself on what you will and will not speak about, on how you will and will not speak, and what your story is going to be, you can say no comment. Again, it's not going to make you look like the fluffiest teddy bear, but you can be assertive and say no. And I think it would be great if most people had some sort of media advocate when they're going through this experience. However, you're not going to in most scenarios. So you have to get comfortable, even if say it like you're a different person, no comment, like, that's no, come out of yourself for a second to advocate for yourself and to advocate for your story and for your family's story. It's really important, and knowing the redirect and being comfortable with giving a hard no, which can feel really intimidating. Again, it's something I advise practicing with a family member or a friend. Practice saying no, practice saying I'm not going to answer that, so you get comfortable saying it. And then if you get in a situation where, like Nicole was saying, you get asked the same question in 6 different ways and you can tell that there's just not going to be any other conversation, any other useful dialogue, you can end an interview early. You can say, okay, thank you, like I know we agreed upon an hour, however, like I have to go. Or you can say like, hi, that'll be all for me today. You can do it politely but firmly, like that's going to be the last question for us today. Normally a journalist will like wrap up. It's like, this is my last question. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you can say? You can say that was the last question. Thanks. Thank you so much. I'm done. And if you have a relationship with the journalist, you can also, if it's more something where it's not a total stranger, you can say like, hey, I'm feeling like this was like, I'm at my max today. Like I don't have anything else to say. I'll catch up with you later, but like I'm done. Because sometimes
Opheli, I have a question for you. So, a lot of times when we're working with families, we come across families who are so in need of media coverage and they just so desperately want it that they're just willing to put up with some of the most atrocious behavior sometimes by journalists. And we constantly are trying to empower them with exactly what you're talking about. So I think what you're speaking about is so important. And if you could just like speak a little bit about how there's always some sort of other type of media available out there. It just might be a little bit of digging in another direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I spoke to before about the 8 buckets that I broke them down into, and the 2 bigger buckets of that, like traditional one. So if you're getting hounded by like a tabloidy place and you're like, well, this is going to be my only opportunity, I have to talk to this, you know, I'll stop name dropping publications, but I have to talk to this place. It's the only journalist who's shown interest. That might be true, but you don't deserve to have someone just exploit you, try to get you to say like the worst, most horrible details of your life so far, to try to disrespect the loved one you're trying to help to get media coverage for, that you're advocating for. You don't deserve that. That's not okay. There's a million other ways to get media coverage. Some of them might be slower or a little more like you got to put on your little detective hat yourself to find an email, but there's podcasts, there's newsletters, there's, again, like I said earlier, like op-eds. There's, if you're getting hounded by one national tabloid, I bet that means you could get the attention of your local newspaper. You could even use that initial interest to leverage that to say, hi, I'm getting reached out to by the, or I'm already did it, but I'm getting reached out to by the Daily Mail, but I would really much prefer to speak to, the Indie Star about my story. That's what you do. You can leverage the interest you've already gotten to get other interests. And if you've already done one interview and it's been public and you don't like it, but you have the link to that story, you leverage the link to that story. Like if you've already done some media where you're like, okay, like this is not how I want my story to be covered. This is not what I want. Use that experience and leverage that, because if you have the proof that someone cared already, that is going to we have this term called newsworthiness. So if we see that a story was already newsworthy to somebody else, we're gonna other journalists will be like, okay, well, why was it newsworthy? Like, what's going on here? It's gonna pique their interest. And the whole word newsworthy is another hotly debated term in journalism. So I'm not going to get into that, but you can always leverage any initial newsworthiness of your story to get other coverage. And it can, if there's a true crime podcaster you think is doing a really good job, or if there's a Substack you follow that covers one of the related issues, if there's a trade publication that you think that would be related to the thing you do, there's a million different things, a social media account, a TikToker, an Instagram account. Like, you can start small, you can start on the like less formalized side of media to leverage that into media. I can't tell how many times I found a story based off of a viral Reddit thread. You can go into Reddit threads and be like, hi, I'm looking for visibility on this. I want to talk about this, generate discussion, and, use that as leverage to the next person you contact. Hi, like, people care about this. Like, here's proof that people care about this, is really what you're doing all the time. Not that people should care about it, that people do care about it. Um, and that is unfortunately a huge barrier and valley. There's a million things I think people should care about, but I have to, as a journalist, you're always making those decisions of like, what do people already care about, you know? Um, so yeah, that's Um, okay, back onto never be afraid to ask a follow-up question by yourself. So if you're in an interview and you get asked a question, you can ask a question to journalists too. You can be like, "How are you going to use that?" Or like, what do you want to know that?" Or like, "What have you heard? Like, what did you hear that made you want to ask that question? Like, do you have information I don't have?" And you can be very tactful about it, but you can also be like, "What do you mean? What are you talking about? Why would you say why would you ask that is a little bit confrontational, but you can you can ask it. Don't be afraid to ask also for clarification if you're confused by a question or it doesn't make sense or you need another if you need another few seconds to formulate the answer in your head. You can be like, can you repeat that? Or like, oh, can you like rephrase that? I'm like not clear on what you meant. You can use these little tools to give yourself more time or also to just give yourself the opportunity. Like they asked a question and they like listed 3 examples. So by the middle of the question, you're like, okay, they're just talking now. I don't remember what the actual question was, which I'm really guilty of that. I love to list examples that I think are very clarifying. And then my interviewee will be like, what were you actually asking me? And so you can ask that, like, what was the actual question? Sorry. And it's I've had that in a total, I was interviewing a cruise expert once and I went on a tangent about Dr. Odyssey and they're like, okay, no, but what did you want me to talk about? Because it's not Dr. Odyssey. So you can always ask them to clarify or rephrase the question or repeat the question or simplify the question, anything that you need in that regard. And then end the interview by confirming that you have a way to contact the journalist. So oftentimes the journalist will be like, is there anyone else I should talk to? Is there anyone else like do I, for a follow-up, can I reach you at this number again? Like is there an email I can reach you at if they called you on the phone or like if they're interviewing on TV, things like that. Do the same thing to the journalist. You want to be able to make sure that your story is going to get out in the world, that if they make a mistake, you're going to be able to contact them, that you can contact them for anniversaries or follow-ups or awareness months. You want all of that stuff. You want to be able to have that. So ask for their phone number and their email. And if you feel like it's the vibe, their social media, but like if you're talking to a veteran reporter who might be like, I don't have Instagram. I'm 57 years old. I don't have Instagram. An actual thing an interviewee said to me once. So you always should ask for that information, at least email and phone number. Maybe if they don't want to give you their phone number, email and website or email and Twitter. Oftentimes they might have their own like Signal or WhatsApp also if they're harder news reporters. Always ask for that information at the end if you don't already have it. That way you can contact them. Again, it's a two-way street. All of this is a two-way street. You can ask them questions. You can ask for their contact information, all of that. So I would even advise I will probably make one with Haley, but like a little pre-interview prep checklist so that you have all of this before you even get on the phone with them or get on the camera with them.
I think Shana will appreciate this also. A little tip: don't give your cell phone number, your personal cell phone number, to anyone, including journalists, so that they'll bombard you and they'll share your phone number with other
Yes.
journalists. So,
Yes.
just a little tip.
Yes. Ideally, if you can have one method of contact for journalists to contact you, that is best. Journalists typically have one method of contact for contacting sources, primarily, or ways that they can be contacted. Like most people will say, like, I have a specific signal or things like that. So yeah, don't share any information with a journalist ever that you don't want to be shared with other people. That goes for your interview, that goes for any materials you send them, anything you say to them that you have not explicitly labeled off the record is liable to go to other people. So,
Yeah. Well, okay, so family interviews, they're done. What do they do next? What are some things that they can do, after the interview's
so
over?
you've secured that contact information and you've written it down somewhere where you're not going to lose sight of it. Um, and then you're going to keep open that line of communication. If you feel like if you feel like you had you said something during the interview that you were like not super, you're like, oh, I don't like, I was thinking about that and I think I could have phrased that better. Or I forgot to mention that just email them or text them, whatever information, however you've been contacting them. Just be like, hey, like earlier today during the interview, like I totally bungled that fact. It was actually 1975, not 1977. I just want you to know so that everyone's correct. If you don't have anything to follow up like that, if you think the interview went well, just do, I call it like dinner party rules. Send out like a little thank you, like thank you so much for your time. Here's that information. Even if you already shared that information, it never hurts to share it again. That set of information you always should have, the contacts, some sort of summary of the information you want to be shared. So whether that's a press release or a research document or a case file, put it in. And then again, if you have photos that you would prefer for the story to have, share those as well. So always send that follow-up, even if you don't have anything like corrections or addendums or additional information. Always reshare that. You can do it like the next day, or if you know that the story is coming up, if it's a story for that day or something, like immediately after you get off the call, send it. But I mean, that's kind of the best method, is to do it right away. But if you want to like give it a little time to breathe, you know it's going to be for a story that's not coming out until next week, you can send it the next day. And that's immediately after. And then after the story comes out, if they're a good journalist, they're going to send you the link. But sometimes people get really busy, or they get the assignment out and they're already on, it's a really tough game in journalism right now. I wish we could say we're working on one story really well a week, but the reality is it's like 5 stories a day. So if they've already pushed past and are working on 6 other things, they might not send it to you. So you can always say like, oh, like I know it was supposed to publish today, like can you share the link when it's done, and just remind them. And then I also would advise, especially for cases that don't have a lot of like high speed momentum, if it's been years or months, identify key dates that you are going to want media coverage on, and reach out to those journalists about 2 weeks ahead of that date. So that gives them time in their editorial planning to you can advocate for that inclusion. So for birthdays, for any other sort of significant date in your family's case, and then also for anniversary and awareness days and months. So again, I'm going to use the domestic violence example. So for Domestic Violence Awareness Month, you can say, hi, like I'm reaching out again because we're quickly approaching this month, and I really want to make sure that there's continued coverage about my family's case. Here's a couple of things that I think are particularly relevant and why it's like important to cover right now. I would love to hop on a call or like talk about this out more over text or email or whatever. Just being consistent with that will help you. Even if they can't do it that month, if they say no once, it's not a no forever. Just do it again the next time. It's really a connection. It's a numbers game sometimes. You're going to get a lot of no's or no responses, but you just have to keep going. That's just all of journalism. Like, I can't tell you how many pitches I've had just never responded to or flat out rejected. Like, it's just a constant game of no's. And so for every 10 no's, you might get a yes. And it's probably closer. From the journalist side, it's like for every 100 no's, you get a yes. So as you're pitching, don't be discouraged. This is just like, people in journalism are a nerd to rejection, or straight up just like, I don't have time for that. No. So just keep going. And one no never means forever no. And then follow them on social media. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention, but journalism isn't exactly a thriving industry right now. So it's very possible a reporter who is working at a publication where you talk to them might not be there in 6 months, might not be there in 3 months. It's a very volatile industry, and whether it's through layoffs or they're changing locations, they're changing markets, they're changing publications, it's good to follow them on like social media, like on Instagram or LinkedIn or wherever you can find them on social media, to just be apprised of if they're leaving the place that they are, so you can, that's good information to have. It's also great to be connected. Like if you know, like if you know that reporter, you can always say, hey, I'm like still interested in having my story published at the Indy Star. I know you're not there anymore. Could you connect me with the person who could do my story over there? So maintaining the relationship with the individual reporter is really important, because that will you can always reach out and ask them a question even if they're not there anymore. And then, again, I can't emphasize enough, be patient and never be afraid to follow up. Like, I would say if you haven't heard back after 4 emails, you're probably not going to. But if you're feeling like it, why not? I mean, don't send them 4 emails in one day, but like if you haven't heard back after a week, you can send another email. And then if you haven't heard back after 2 weeks after that, you can send another email. Or if you feel like it's a particularly urgent situation, then you can be like, I emailed you on Monday. I'm sorry I'm emailing you again on Wednesday. I emailed you on Wednesday. I'm sorry I'm emailing you again before the weekend. I mean, find your personal line between persistence and harassment. Don't cross it, but you can be very you can advocate for yourself. Again, it all comes back to self-advocacy. It's like, I know this is meriting attention, and then if you haven't heard back after like the 5th email, I would say you're probably not going to this month around. You can maybe circle back in a month, on longer lead times, I would extend that a little bit more, or try reaching out to another reporter. But yes, keep in contact with the reporter, and also vocalize that that's something you intend to do. Like, it was so great speaking with you today. I will be reaching back out if there's any more developments on the case, or as we come up with other like relevant dates, milestones, things like that. And I look forward to continue working with you. Just state that's your intention so that they know to keep an eye out for your emails.
Thank you so much. That was incredibly informative and very helpful to the families here. We have some wonderful handouts that Opheli has on interacting with media and on media strategy that we will add into the chat. And then I think um, we'll get started on some Q&A.
Yeah, I noticed there was one about a press release. So we did do a webinar on a press releases. However, I'm sure that you can easily answer this. Meg would like to know what's the best way to send out a press release, sending to an individual email to each journalist, or is there a different way to do it?
So I see a lot of my press releases through press press release wires. For again, not just for this area of coverage, for everything like PR Newswire and things like that. But those are paid services, and I wouldn't advise doing them until you've tried the traditional route of reaching out and emailing journalists individually first. Maybe emailing a couple of journalists at a publication, or journalists and editors. If you see, it always is worth taking the extra step to see if you can find an editor of publication, because those are the people who are assigning stories. So you might not gather the interest of an individual reporter, but you might gather the interest of an editor who will then assign a reporter to cover your story. And also, just as a reality of journalism right now, there are more editors left in newsrooms than there are writers. So you have better odds of finding an editor than you do finding a writer, at a lot of places. So I would be creative with how many types of people you send that press release to. So send it to podcasters, send it to popular TikTok accounts, send it to, and then make sure you have a really good subject line. Don't just do press release, do like pitch, da da da, whatever your compelling headline is, and make sure it is compelling. Like, that's going to get, you have to get someone to open the email before they even reject you. They have to open the email. And journalists are I receive like anywhere, even I'm freelancing, so I'm not even at a publication where they can easily find my email address through my publication. I'm still receiving around 300 emails a day, and that's like on the low end. Sometimes I receive, like at my last role on staff, I was receiving about 800 emails a day. So you need to, and I do not read 800 emails a day. I wouldn't have time to do anything else. I do a quick scan. I read subject lines, and I open based off of the subject lines I've flagged that are worthy of my attention. And then if I have extra time that day by chance, I'll go through and I'll quickly open each email. But that's typically not the kind of time constraints a lot of journalists are working under. So make sure when you're sending out those press releases, that subject line of your email is like the most important thing you're going to write by far. So that's my biggest tip on press releases. And if you're feeling like really, really desperate and you've somehow come into like a influx of cash, you can try the wires. I would not recommend that for this type of storytelling, but it is an option. And then another thing that you can do is there are expert networks for journalists. I'm thinking of one called Quoted, which is a little bit different type of experts than what I'm thinking about here. But you can see if you can get your name and contact information added as an expert for whatever you feel is applicable. So, and I'll share more about that afterwards with the group so that they can maybe explore that option. But yeah, for press releases specifically, I would go with pitching individual journalists first, and I would also go with pitching editors instead of reporters only.
I had a question actually, just as you were talking. I was just thinking about. I get contacted by a lot of people who are asked, how do I get my story out there? How do I tell my story? And I have shared some stories with journalists that I have a relationship with, and sometimes it's just a matter of, I guess, if the bosses say yes or no. Like you said, you get told no a lot. So how can someone find the right type of journalist to contact? Should they, depending on the story, should they stick to local instead of national? Like, how do they go about that process?
I mean, I could give a whole entire webinar on just like the
Yeah.
strategy behind it.
Maybe we'll do
Um,
one.
yeah, but I think that something that is really important is um, it goes back to that first tip. You have to know what your story is, you know? And unfortunately, there's no shortage of tragedy in this country right now. And you're not competing against this just good news, you know. Unfortunately, the reporters don't wake up and we're like, I'm going to write about the great new roads they're building and all of this money they're putting into public education and all the trees we're planting, and maybe I'll fit in something bad if it happens. I wake up and I have like a dashboard for like just my own insane journalism needs, and it's just a wall to wall of awful. And so knowing exactly what your story is when you go forward is going to be helpful to be the specificity is going to be really important. um, and the relevancy, if you can connect what you're experiencing to something that's a larger topic in your community or nationwide, that's really important too, because it helps with this element of newsworthiness slash timeliness. So again, if you're especially if you're working on a cold case where you're like, oh, this is 40 years old, I can't even get like the people whose jobs it is to care about it are kind of like you know. um you can do other things to connect it to issues right now. You know, I mean, I think that there's a very large ecosystem for crime stories right now. There's a very large appetite. Like I think of places like People Magazine that every 40 minutes they're publishing a new crime story. So you can reach out to places like that that have a large need and volume for a lot of material. But again, you're going to run into issues of, are they going to take time with your story? Are they going to be precious with it? Probably not. Not at first, at least. Um, but then you can also look at places that might have covered issues that connect with what's happening to you. That might not be the exact same thing they cover, but um, Nicole, if you don't mind me using your story, there's if it's something that happened in out in like this became kind of interconnected with other areas, other topic areas, right? Like other, it wasn't just a crime story. It was a, in a way, like there was intersections with the outdoors, with the the traveling aspect of it. There was the social media aspect. There are reporters and editors who cover these topics outside of specifically what happened that you can reach out to, who might be willing to cover your story through that lens. So if you have a cold case and it happened in a national park 40 years ago, you might find a reporter who's really covering national parks extensively, and it's like, I have a national park story for you. It's not your traditional national park story. It's not about Arcadia's, restoration, but it is about Arcadia. And you can go through that angle, and it takes a lot of kind of like really painful creativity, I would say. But you can take these approaches and find how your very specific story connects and has interconnected webs to other things, and that's only going to help you expand the possibilities for how you get coverage.
I think we have one more. It's what should families do if an article written about their loved one has an error?
Contact that journalist. Contact that journalist right away. You got their phone number and you got their email. Or you got one of them. You contact them right away. If they don't respond and they don't fix it, you find that editor's email. You go and you find that normally a publication will have a masthead, and you go find the name of the editor-in-chief or the executive editor or the senior editor, and you send a link to the article and you say, this is the error, this is what it should say, I need this fixed. And then if that doesn't work, and hopefully you contact, journalists make mistakes all the time, they're human. They'll probably just be like, oh, let me fix that. If it's in print, they might issue a correction. If it's on television, they might have to just say, like, last night on our story, we said it was this, and it'll be that. They'll issue a correction. If it's digital media, they should be able to change it and just put a little thing like, this story previously said blah, 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 and now it says this. Always when you're emailing the reporter, make sure you highlight what the correct information is and tell them what the correct information is. And if none of that works, you should go on social media and tweet about it. Because let me tell you, it's a very fast way to get their attention. And encourage other people you know to do the same. This story is incorrect. Tag the publication. Oftentimes that'll work. If none of that works, you can go on your own. Make sure you just are on. Again, social media is a public forum. Make sure you're correcting that information publicly and repeatedly. So like on every platform, and do it a couple of times. Like on your Instagram stories, tweet it, on Reddit, TikTok. I talk about TikTok because I'm not, I know I didn't mention it a lot. I'm not on TikTok for my own sanity, but it is a very powerful tool. And we could do a whole nother segment on just how to utilize TikTok as a media advocacy tool. But yeah,
I think we have future webinars planned already. Just keep checking them out. Write them down, Shayna.
if journalists get your story wrong, contact the journalists, tell them how they got it wrong. Most of them will be mortified and want to fix it right away. If not, contact their boss. If not, go to social media.
Call them out, right?
Yes. Yeah, and if they do something and you're just like, this headline's bogus, you can say that. That's fine. So that's what they signed up for.
I love that. And all of this is just empowering families, and families are victims too. They're secondary victims. And this is so important because a lot of times when families come to us, and typically when they're families of, long-term missing or unresolved cases, they feel so defeated because they've just been waiting for someone to like help, or for someone to do the right thing, or to come forward, or they've been waiting for law enforcement to make the next step. So I love the empowerment that this gives families. It puts it back in their, the ball's in their court, even though that's like a cheesy saying, but it truly, it does that. And we constantly want to empower families to make sure that they feel like they are making the decisions, that they're running the show, because it's their loved one. They're they, even though they might not be able to, sign the search warrant and go and investigate, they do have to allow law enforcement to do that. They need to be empowered in every other decision-making process, because, something was taken from them. And so they need to be empowered in every other step of the way. So I absolutely love how this just empowers families. So thank you so much for all of this incredible information. So where can people follow you or reach out if they have additional questions? I know that you are on different social media and different ways. How best would it be for them to contact you?
Yeah. My email is the best way, and this is a great time to do some subject line practice. If you email me from this webinar, just say like from the webinar in the subject line so I can quickly pluck it out of my inbox. It's in the chat, but it's just my first name, Opheli Garcia, Garcia, and then half of my last name, law@gmail.com. Everyone thinks I'm a lawyer because of that, but I'm not. I have no legal training whatsoever. So you can always email me there. I'm on Instagram. It's just my first, last names, Opheli Garcia Lawler. I'm on Twitter. Full disclosure, those are my personal accounts. Very unfiltered woman. Makes me unpopular as a journalist, and it might make me unpopular in your feed. So, but you can always DM me there, or connect with me there. Um, and I'm happy to chat on any platform. And then this is my website, Opheli Garcia Lawler, if you want to see more of my work, or that also has my email on it, and links to my Twitter and my Blue Sky, and a picture of me that looks so much better than I look.
It's a great picture. Your website was awesome. I was like, this
Your
is
website's
really cool.
beautiful.
I built it myself. I love pink. But yeah, reach out to me if you have questions. I'm happy to schedule. Um, I'm a freelancer, so right now my schedule is pretty adjustable. So if anyone has any questions or want to do like a 30-minute conversation or like practice interviews, like I'm always happy to like set aside a little bit of time to do that. I'm gonna keep working with Haley to make a couple more like resources. I think the best thing is to just have easily referenceable things that you can adapt and turn into your own thing. And my last little note is that the best way to understand the media is to consume it. So if you are trying to figure out like what's going on, it might not be a pleasant consumption experience, but I would just go look at examples of how other stories like yours have been covered. Especially when you're trying to think of like what your headline is going to be or what you don't want your headline to be. I feel like this was like a really important nugget. Just go look at everything that's out there, and don't be afraid to, especially for subject lines, don't be afraid to copycat someone else's headline and use that structure for your own.
And if you just jumped in late, this will be on Gabby Petito Foundation YouTube channel, so you can go back and watch it. There's some really great information. All of Opheli's information is also linked in the chat there on YouTube, so feel free to go there to find that.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and with our families. And we definitely want to connect for future webinars and, kind of pick another subject to kind of deep dive. We really appreciate you spending this time with us. And thank you to everybody who joined in tonight. We're always super glad to have you join us. And a special thanks to Haley. Haley, as our media specialist, helps to plan the webinars and do our outlines and get us ready for these. So thank you, Haley, for always getting us to this point where we are successful in our webinars. So we appreciate you.
Yeah.
And Opheli, you are welcome back whenever you want to come back. We just loved having you, and I also love your passion for what you do. I love anybody who's passionate about what they do. So I think it's really great that you love your job and you are incredible at it. So that's really awesome.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, everyone.
Yeah, good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks.